If I were to bet with my head and not my heart about who would win the Pacific Division, I'd put my money on the Phoenix Suns. That roster is so unbelievably stacked. There's always a big if about their health. But if healthy, the Phoenix Suns are a terrifying team for anybody to deal with. And Sacramento Kings fans remember very, very well how many times the Kings were up big against the Suns last season, ultimately to fall apart and lose. On today's Locked On Kings podcast, continuing our Pacific Division preview series, Brendon Kleen of Locked On Suns joins me. Are the Kings the biggest threat to Phoenix in the division? We'll discuss right here on Locked On Kings.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily Sacramento Kings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, it is that time for another episode of Locked On Kings.
Hello and welcome into Locked On Kings, your podcast hub for Sacramento Kings coverage all offseason long. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Game time. My name is Matt George. I have the privilege of being your host here. I'm a Sacramento sports anchor and reporter for ABC 10 News. The Pacific Division preview series has been fun so far. I did a preview with the Locked On Lakers podcast for Kings and Lakers. Did a preview for the Kings and Warriors with the Locked On Warriors podcast. Go and check those out if you haven't already. Now we switch our attention to the Phoenix Suns, who, based off of most betting sites, most people you talk to, are kind of the consensus to win the Pacific Division and be the team out of the Pacific that is the most likely to compete for a championship. But as we know, with all these teams in the Pacific, the Suns have their problems. They have their weaknesses. Maybe those weaknesses the Kings can exploit to give us a better idea of the Phoenix Suns, their outlook on this season, and maybe some similarities between where the Phoenix Suns are and where the Sacramento Kings are trying to get to. Brendon Kleen from Locked On Suns joins me. Continuing with our Pacific Division preview series, welcoming in the team that I think most people have as their consensus top pick to win the division, and out of the entire division, the team that's most likely to actually compete for an NBA championship. Even with my Kings bias, I don't necessarily disagree with it. The Phoenix Suns are who we're talking about today. And Brendon Kleen, the host of the Locked On Suns podcast, nice enough to join us here to preview this series. Brendon, when you look at the Suns, you look at the Pacific Division, some would say it's a wide open division. Some would say it's predetermined to be the Suns division, but expectations are always a real thing. Tell me about this group this year. Is it championship or bust in your mind, or where is this team at this year if they don't ultimately get the job done with the roster that they have?
Yeah, they're as all in as a team I think can be in the league. They don't have any draft picks outside of 7 years from now. They have made 2 mega trades to get superstars on this team. New owner, all the things that tell you this group wants to win. And I don't know if it's championship or bust, but I think that they're going to have to make at least one big move if this doesn't get a lot closer to a championship. One of those big 3 is probably going to be in trade rumors next summer. Those are the stakes here for this Suns team, and they've fallen short multiple years in a row now in fairly embarrassing fashion. So they have gone into this summer, I think, definitely just wanting to be more stable, raise their floor, have a regular season that can put them in position to have a good seed, to get a favorable matchup in the playoffs, and all the things that, make your life a little easier come April, May, and June. So it's high stakes. So we're going to say that about almost every team we talk about, I think, today, but they're in that boat for sure.
Every team deals with an element of, right, like you got to stay healthy. Of course. So it's not fair to just dissect that element of the Phoenix Suns compared to the Sacramento Kings or any other team. But with a roster like Phoenix's, right? There's no doubt that they have some of the most star power at the top of the league with Durant and with Bradley Beal and with Devin Booker. But health is always going to be a question with that team. I mean, I think you got 75 games of Kevin Durant last season. How confident are the Suns? How confident are you that you'll get another 75 plus game season out of Durant and then Booker? And then, of course, Bradley Beal has dealt with injury issues, it seems like, since the beginning of time. So, how much is health a focus for this Suns team versus kind of the outside's way of doubting this team?
Yeah, what I'll say on that is the thing that killed them about it last year was the timing of the injuries. When you build a big three, when you build a roster the way that the Suns have, part of what the value of that is you can survive one star being out. But they just had too many times when multiple were out. And you get to training camp and Bradley Beal has a flare up of this back issue that apparently had been flagged even at the time of the trade several months prior, but we didn't know about it. Then basically right away, opening week, Devin Booker goes down. So then you're dealing with Kevin Durant being the only star in a roster that was not ready to bear that level of depletion at all. And they just got onto the wrong foot. So if they go through even a season where their stars do miss games, but it's more sporadic, maybe not all at the beginning of the year, and they just have more depth overall, you'd hope they could weather it better, period. I think it could still happen, honestly, in terms of somebody like Beal, who, let's just face it, he seems to be a fairly brittle dude as an athlete. It's random stuff that adds up, but at a certain point, it's hard to ignore the realities of that. As far as Durant goes, though, the fact that he was the healthy one and had to handle so much of a responsibility actually kind of made me feel better, to be honest, because he not only played 75 games, he played 37 minutes a night in his mid 30s and handled it. He was just this fairly same version of Durant, sort of post Achilles that we all remember, Brooklyn, Phoenix, whatever. It was Kevin Durant. He made second team All NBA. He was a very, very good player for them. So if you're telling me that he could do a little less, play a little bit fewer minutes, and I still have a similar role, I actually think that that's a very good sign that he's still capable of that, given that they probably don't want to ask him to do it again. So we'll see. But I think you have to pencil in some absences just given who these guys are.
The NBA has essentially made divisions pretty meaningless with the exception of like your divisional opponents. You're going to be playing 4 times, 2 at home and 2 on the road. Ultimately, winning your division doesn't matter much, which is sad that the Sacramento Kings have Pacific Division banners hanging up inside the Golden One Center. But ultimately, winning the division doesn't mean that much. However, I'd like to believe the team that wins the Pacific Division is probably in a pretty comfortable playoff spot in the Western Conference. And we'll get more into where we expect these teams to end up in the West. But whether you're going off of betting sites, just conversations around the league, it sounds like out of all the teams in the Pacific, it sounds like the Sacramento Kings are the team that's believed to have the best chance of winning the division or taking the division away from the Suns, who are, again, from what I've seen, the consensus pick to win that division outright. With your outlook of the Kings, really your outlook of every single team in the Pacific, which one gives you the most pause, or which one do you think the Suns might be most concerned about?
Yeah, you know what I think of divisions in 2024 in the NBA is the diehard fans still care, right? Because there is history, and we all remember the games over the years between these teams. So it does I remember the past few years of Suns Kings games or Suns Lakers games or Suns Warriors games more than the average opponent, even though it might just be one more of them per year. So I still think of it as a pretty important thing just in terms of how you shape up against those other groups in your part of the country. And I look at it as the Kings, to me, are probably the team that might be able to push the Suns most consistently, because they're both tilted toward the offensive end, right? And I just think that they're going to be able to keep pace with one another, as we saw last year, where all of these games basically went down to the wire. All these games were 120 plus points each side, and that's just hard to deal with. And you add some of the additions that obviously Sacramento has made. The Suns want to be able to be more, complete as a team themselves, and I don't see that going anywhere. I look at the betting odds, and obviously the Lakers are near the top of the Western Conference because that's just what we see this time of year. But I think all these teams are going to be pretty packed together. So I think you're looking at maybe the Clippers at the bottom, Suns or somebody at the top. But I see it all between roughly 42 to 50 wins. And I do think the Kings, to me, consistently have been, during this iteration of the Suns, the team that's routinely challenged them the most on a night in, night out basis across the course of the season. So those games very well might decide who emerges from this pack.
Today's episode of the Locked On Kings podcast is brought to you by BetterHelp. Kids are always learning and growing, right? It's amazing. I have a 3-year-old, his brain, how much he can soak in, how much he takes in every single day, plus, of course, the physical growth that he goes through. But as adults, sometimes we lose our curiosity and we lose our ability to grow and adapt and fix ourselves and problem solve. What's something that you'd like to learn? Gardening, a new language, or maybe how to finally beat your best friend in bowling, or for me, it's beat anybody in golf. Therapy can help you reconnect with your sense of wonder because your back to school era can come at any age. If you're thinking about starting therapy, check out BetterHelp. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. All you do is fill out a brief questionnaire and get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. I've been going and seeing my therapist, TJ, since the pandemic, right? And it's helped me grow, helped me handle things exponentially. The amount of life skills that I've developed to be able to tackle issues that in the past would weigh me down or that I would struggle with. Consider giving therapy a try at the very least. And you do not have to have massive problems to benefit from a session or two with a therapist. Rediscover your curiosity with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. The Kings were kind of the odd team out in the Pacific Division for a long time, in the sense that you had the Suns, who are very much old generation of stars or older generation of stars. Same thing with the Golden State Warriors. Same thing with the Los Angeles Lakers, and then the LA Clippers, who had Kawhi and Paul George. Now Paul has obviously left LA. And then you had the Kings, who are like in this. Fox and Sabonis aren't young necessarily, but they're in their prime, and the Kings are more on the ascension, while Father Time would suggest that the other teams are on the descend. Not that they're not still great at the spots that they're at. So the Kings kind of took a page out of everybody else's playbook, and they went and targeted a 35-year-old in Demar DeRozan, who brings that star power, but is definitely more of yesterday's generation of stars who have kind of passed the torch. What's your perspective on the DeMar DeRozan edition? I don't think if you're stacking DeRozan against Durant or stacking DeRozan against LeBron, there's a gap, but what do you think about that addition to kind of help elevate the Kings into that win now status of the rest of these teams in the Pacific and many in the West?
Yeah, I think it's a perfectly solid addition from a talent standpoint. I think that he adds to them without really taking away. Harrison Barnes was not himself anymore.
Right.
And so if you're saying, oh, well, this is more of a lean toward offense, I'm not really so sure that that's fully accurate from my view. And obviously, DeMar brings them some intermediate scoring and some isolation ability that they will benefit from, that any team would benefit from. And I also think his fit with how they play, the more that I've thought about it and chewed it over since the move happened, I like it more and more. I think that we have this kind of outdated idea of what DeMar DeRozan is, maybe from when he first broke through with Toronto, but that was like a decade ago. The guy has become a much better pick and roll player, a much better passer. I think he's a little bit better of a defender than, the worst instincts of some older guys. He's not going to be a stopper. So I think he'll make them better at the end of the day. And I think that is more than a lot of teams can say. And the price wasn't too steep. So I think he's somebody that if I'm watching from a Suns point of view, they absolutely have to account for. And that matters.
I would love your perspective on this, even though you have kind of the Suns background. But one of the questions that I said the Kings need to have an answer to this by either the trade deadline or at the very latest by next season or by next offseason is the Kings need to know whether or not they're 100% comfortable going all in with this group. And what I mean by that is the Sacramento Kings, they do have a couple of picks tied up in like pick swap scenarios, like with San Antonio to get this trade happening. They still owe a pick that had protections on it to Atlanta as part of the Kevin Huerter trade from a couple seasons ago. But with the exception of that, they have control of their picks. So they have assets. Plus, they have players on this roster that they could move for upgrades, whether it's at the trade deadline or whatever. But you're not going to be able to find too many more significant upgrade for minimal price moves like the DeMar DeRozan situation. And the Kings can never rely on free agency to attract a big name. DeMar's the biggest name the Sacramento's really ever gotten to say, yes, I'll come and join your team. Phoenix has gone all in, right? Very much so. They have gone all in. They do not have draft picks. This is their group, and they have absolute star power to show for it. And their eyes are set on winning a championship at the end of the day. From the perspective of following a team that has gone all in, what do the Sacramento Kings have to do or have to have, or where do you think this team has to be to where you're comfortable saying, this is it, this is the group we're riding with, we're willing to sacrifice the future for it, let's go?
Yeah, it's a fascinating question when you kind of look at the idea of the Suns going all in, right? Because I think that they sort of crossed their fingers, or maybe the better metaphor is like plugged their nose and dived into the deep end and just kind of hoped that it worked out. I mean, their best evidence that they were quote unquote ready to go all in happened 4 years ago in a hazmat site out in Florida where they just happened to sweep the 8-game little run up to the playoffs that the NBA put together in the bubble. And they said, yes, we'll go get Chris Paul. And that was sort of the beginning of their being all in. And then that group ran its course. Chris Paul kind of got old. And then, hey, a once in a generation opportunity to land a Hall of Fame player in the form of Kevin Durant, who asked specifically to play for you, came along. You don't say no to that.
Right.
And then once that happened, the part that I think gets the most overlooked is the collective bargaining agreement, this new world order that all of the NBA is operating within, with the aprons and these very, very harsh penalties for different team building things that the most rich, spendy teams used to take for granted. That got passed about a month or two after the Suns made the KD trade, which basically locked them into being over the second apron, regardless of what they did. So this idea of blowing through the second apron, which has kind of become a slogan of the Suns that Matt Ishbia gave in a quote after the Bradley Beal trade, there really was no way around it unless you're trying to convince yourself, hey, we can go nail a mid-level exception, or we're going to draft really, really well in the 20s, all these things that are far-fetched that you would probably pick Bradley Beal over. So I'm not sure if the Suns are the best template for it. I will say, as an outsider, Domantas Sabonis is one of the players that I struggle with most in the entire league, because I love watching the guy. I think that he's underrated in terms of the impact that he has on the game day to day. I think that he has taken a step forward since getting to Sacramento in terms of the way that he can dictate outcomes and really affect and make players around him better and up and lift kind of the basketball culture of a team. But I think it's really difficult to build the best NBA team in the league around him. I just think he has these limitations that are going to make that very hard for you. And I think they really shot themselves in the foot with the contract that they gave him off the good vibes of the great year that they had a couple years back. So that's the part that I always get. It's tough for me with Sacramento, just because I get why you got to do some of these things. You mentioned the free agency concerns. The Suns were in a boat like that with a horrible owner for a long time. Not that I'm saying the Kings have that, but free agents not coming. So I get that world. But if you're telling me Domantas Sabonis is the second best player on a championship team, my eyebrows are raised. I would be very curious to see how that happens.
Like I said at the top of the show, today's episode of Locked On Kings is brought to you by Gametime, and this is the number one place for you to buy your tickets to Kings games this season. Buy your tickets to any sporting event, theatrical event, comedy show, major concert, or small concert. It does not matter. Get your tickets on Gametime, and Gametime has a new feature called Gametime Picks that makes it so much easier for getting tickets to your favorite live events. Gametime Picks filters out the fluff to show you incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets, right? Let's say it's a Tuesday night game, Kings versus Clippers. You know you want to go, but there's so many tickets available and you don't know where you want to sit and you don't have time or don't have the energy to sift through all of them to find the exact right seat. Gametime does it for you, right? Gametime will show you, hey, these tickets in this area, the best value, the best bang for your buck, and they give you a variety, right? They don't just show you the best price tickets for the best area that still might be above your budget. Consider that and the many features that Gametime has. The closer you buy tickets to the start of the event, the better the deals are going to be. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. So it's interesting because you said Domantas Sabonis second best player there, but you also talk about building around Sabonis. Now, Sabonis is very much so the foundation of Sacramento's offense, just because naturally that's the type of player that he is. It's funny, in Sacramento, the call for Sabonis is to try to score more and be a little more selfish. And then the conversation about Sabonis seemingly outside of Sacramento is, can you build around Sabonis with how he naturally tries to get his teammates more involved? Like, we're all fascinated to see what the Sabonis and Demar DeRozan pick and roll and dribble handoff looks like, right? Your concerns with Sabonis are echoed around the league, even by many here in Sacramento. I disagree with it from the sense that, one, I'm a complete Domantas Sabonis homer, and I don't understand why he gets the negative receptions or reactions that he gets. But I also know that this year is the first year that there's a $40 million price tag attached to him. So with the money that you're paid, perspective changes. I don't know if you were to move on from Sabonis and try and replace Sabonis, what are you looking to get that's possibly better? Unless you're trying to go for an Embiid or a Jokic, which we know just isn't going to happen. So realistically, I don't know what the Kings could do better than have Sabonis here, but I understand your concerns. But I kind of wanted to pivot that to De'Aaron Fox a little bit, because a lot of people see De'Aaron Fox as the star and the best player in Sacramento. But when there's a conversation of how far can the Kings go, Sabonis seems to be brought up first. With your perspective of De'Aaron Fox, and it's my belief this year, Brendon, that De'Aaron has to do maybe what Devin Booker did a handful of seasons ago, which is to unequivocally become the guy, to where everybody around the league looks at the Kings and goes, yeah, that's De'Aaron Fox's team. That's De'Aaron Fox's squad. And I look at how Jalen Brunson has exploded in New York, how Shai Gilgeous-Alexander has exploded in OKC, and go, okay, John Morant did in Memphis a couple years ago. That's what Fox needs to do. When you think about from the outside perspective, as a team that faces Fox 4 years, every single year for Fox's career, what's your opinion on his star status, which you are very familiar with the roster that you have in Phoenix?
Yeah, I think De'Aaron Fox is a beast. I think that he's one of my favorite players to watch in the entire league. I think the leap that he's been able to make from, very solid prospect to good, interesting young player to very good young player to real, true all-star caliber, all-NBA caliber guy has been very impressive. I feel like the floater game he's been able to add, some of the mid-range comfort, three-point frequency and volume, in addition to the obvious physical gifts that he has. He's just very hard to track. He's very hard to defend because of the improvements that he's made as kind of a three-level scorer to round out his game. I would feel like there's a version of him defensively that's probably even better than we've seen if they have the personnel someday to insulate him a little bit. and he can kind of do less, like a more sound defensive team allows you to do, which can come for this team, I think, in time as they build it out. I think that Fox, to me, I know there's a constant kind of give and take. I don't think the debate really matters of like who's better or whose team is it and all. That's kind of nonsense. They play very well together, Fox and Sabonis. But to me, he is the guy. If I have concerns about how do you build a championship team with Domantas Sabonis at its center, I don't really have those concerns with Fox. And, it's a lot easier to put pieces around where I go, I know how that guy plays with De'Aaron Fox, and that's a big testament to him. But it's also just kind of the nature of his type of archetype. It's just more, we've seen it, we know it, and he's the kind of the best version of it right now, I think, in the league.
Let's talk about the Western Conference. Brennan, this conference is insane, right? There's a scenario where you could have 5-6 plus teams finishing with 50 wins, which, by the way, I think that's like the target number for Sacramento this year. I feel like it's like 50 and you're in the Western Conference. That might be the only guarantee that you have is you win 50 games, you will make the playoffs in the West, or you should make the playoffs. If there's a scenario where you win 50 games and you don't make it in, you just have to chalk this up to the West is literally the best we've ever seen in the history of the NBA. But the West is a beast. Every single Western Conference game that both of our teams play could have massive implications for the standings, considering 1 or 2 games could be the difference of 3 or 4 spots. When you look at Phoenix and how you expect them to shake up in the West, I look at the West in tiers, and I think tier 1 is certainly 3 teams in Minnesota, OKC, and probably Dallas. If you want to make it 4 and include Denver in there, I'm okay with that. I admit the Suns out of the Pacific Division are the only team that can comfortably work their way into tier 1 unless these other teams surprise people. How does Phoenix elevate themselves into that tier 1? And do you think they're knocking on the door of that top tier, or they're just middle of the pack that's just trying to make it to the playoffs and then make their run?
Yeah, I see the tier. I agree that tiers are the best way to look at it. Especially when you don't have a favorite like we did for all those years between Cleveland and Golden State and Miami
Right.
before that and everything. And this year I feel like we are in the West looking at a big top tier.
Mm-hmm.
And I have Oklahoma City at the top of it.
Mm-hmm.
But I have Denver, Minnesota, Dallas, and Phoenix all in it. And I have the Suns clearly at the back of it. So I'll be fair there. I don't think, it'd be very difficult to make a case of them over the Thunder or them even over the Timberwolves, who just swept them into oblivion like 4 months ago. So, I'm not going to be crazy and do any of that. But yeah, when I look at the Suns, I guess it's a little bit future looking in that this team has a big move to make still. And this offseason went a long way toward giving them even more flexibility to make it. They did not trade the 1 first-round pick that they have available to them. They added multiple new contracts that are going to be a lot easier to deal in an environment where they can't stack contracts together because of this second apron. So they didn't make it this summer. Yusuf Nurkic, still on this team. Royce O'Neal came back on a contract. Grayson Allen extended in April. He's trade eligible in about a month and a half. There's going to be another shoe to be dropped here with that pick and one of these contracts and some of their other assets. It's just a matter of when does that move happen? How good of a deal can they find? And really, what position do they think that they need to target? Because I'm not even positive on that. But right now, I see them as the back of that top tier. Still, that probably puts them in position of fighting for a 6 seed because that tier, I made it so big. But more championship equity, I think, than some of the other teams you could put in the mix for that 6 seed just because of their star power and the hope that they can swing for the fences and make that big trade.
Finally, Brendan, I look at the in-season the NBA Emirates Cup, as they call it now. And I would have said when it was created, I would have said, like, why would this I loved it. I love the idea of it. I thought it was a smashing success. But I would initially ask the question, like, why would this matter to a team like Phoenix? Why would this matter to a team like LA? And then you had the Lakers win it last year against an Indiana Pacers team that was like, this is what the in-season tournament is made for. Like, teams like this to put themselves on a massive spotlight and potentially win something this season. Now, Indiana ended up being way better than I think everybody expected and made a pretty decent run in the Eastern Conference. But why, other than the fact that the group stage games and some of the early games matter towards the regular season record, like why would the Emirates Cup at all matter to a team like Phoenix other than competitive drive and things of that nature? What is your outlook from Phoenix on the Emirates Cup?
My outlook as Brendon is that I love it as well. I
Yeah.
think that it's really fun. I think it clicked right away. I think that people wanted to hate it, but this year it'll just become more normal. And I think we'll just settle into like, hey, these games are a little more intense. The courts are zany. Let's just have fun with it and enjoy it. And the Vegas thing, we'll see what happens of who actually really cares. I thought the Anthony Davis performance, frankly, that we got in the final was like one of the best games any player had all year. So like it's been there. We've seen the delivery on what the promise of this thing was. But yeah, as far as looking at it from a Suns point of view, I think both Suns fans and Kings fans are just appreciative that nobody ended up in West C, because that group is an absolute nightmare. Aside from that, I don't think the Suns are going to care particularly about it. And they didn't really last year. They just kind of happened to make it into the round before Vegas, which was still a knockout round. And I believe they played the Kings, if I'm not mistaken, in that game. And we'll just kind of, if they win the games that allow them to go to it, I think that they'll like the opportunity and the competition that's going to kind of bring out of them. But yeah, these veteran teams, if it's a back-to-back or a rest night or somebody tweaked an ankle the night before, the game before, nobody's going to be pressing the gas on these games. I think it's just going to be another Pacers. Pick your Pacers 2024 edition, maybe the Rockets or something, and they break through and take advantage of this thing. But I'm just going to enjoy it as a fan.
Well, Brendon, there were two teams that gave Kings fans PTSD from last season. One was the New Orleans Pelicans, who beat the Kings 6 times last year, which is just insanity. The other one was the Phoenix Suns, because I don't know if you remember, the Kings had big leads against Phoenix multiple times and just could not close the damn game. Like, I don't know what it was.
I was in the building for multiple of those. Yeah, they raised our blood pressure too, but I guess we had the come down. You guys didn't.
Oh, man, the fourth quarter against Phoenix is just, maybe Demar DeRozan alone can help save the Kings with their fourth quarter collapses against Phoenix. But we'll see how these two teams shake up against each other. Maybe a playoff series. Maybe they battle for the Pacific Division. We'll have to wait and see. For any attention or any interest that you have in Phoenix Suns basketball this season, go and check out the Locked On Suns podcast with Brendon Kleen. Brendon, thanks so much for taking the time, my man. Good luck this season. We still got a ways to go, but we'll get there soon. But I appreciate you.
Thanks, Matt. Anytime.